just trying to get sort of sounds that no one else was using.
In the winter of 1979, in Studio 2 of the Townhouse in West London, a 24-year-old engineer pressed a button he wasn't supposed to touch. I accidentally pressed the reverse talkback while he was playing, and the most almighty sound came out of the speaker. And out of the studio speakers came a drum sound nobody had ever heard before, huge, violent, and then gone the instant the drummer lifted his hands off the kit.
So I think we had a drum machine going through a guitar amp, but with mics in the room, so you can hear it sound slightly sort of roomy sounding.
The drummer was Phil Collins. The engineer was Hugh Padgham.
But there was a studio in London called the Townhouse, which had this stone room. And that's where I'd recorded with Peter Gabriel. You know, I was his drummer for a little while when he couldn't afford American musicians. So he invited me to play on some tracks on that album, which was his third album. And there was a song called Intruder on that, which was basically my drum part and a song he adapted to fit it. But I fell in love with the engineer who got this sound. So when I did my solo album, I, got together with him and we did Face Value together.
And the sound that fell out of that mistake would go on to end up on almost every hit record of the next 10 years. Bowie, Springsteen, Prince, Duran Duran, Madonna. Once you know what to listen for, you hear it absolutely everywhere, because for about a decade, it basically was the sound of pop music. And the microphone that made it was never meant to record a single thing. Rewind 6 months. Peter Gabriel is making his third solo album, and he's stuck. 2 records into his solo career, he still hasn't climbed out of Under the Shadow of Genesis, the band he'd walked out of back in 1975. He wants a record that sounds like nothing that came before it, so he starts inventing rules for himself. And the first rule might be the strongest one anybody's ever handed a drummer. No cymbals. Gabriel later explained the logic pretty plainly. Artists given complete freedom die a horrible death. So when you tell them what they can do, they get creative. Which is why I banned cymbals. A cymbal is basically the glue in a rock song. It washes over the transitions, it fills up the top of the mix, it quietly tells your ear when a section's about to change. Take it away, and suddenly every dumb hit is left standing there completely exposed, with dead silence all around it. And the drummer who agreed to play like that was Gabriel's old bandmate, the man who'd taken over his old job as the voice of Genesis, Phil Collins. Studio 2 at Townhouse had something almost no other studio on earth had in 1979. One of the first SSL 4000B mixing consoles ever built. Buried inside it was a circuit called the Listen mic, an intercom basically, a single microphone hanging in the middle of the live room so the engineer could hear a musician talking to him from the other side of the glass. And because a voice across a big room is a quiet thing, SSL had strapped a savagely heavy compressor onto that circuit. It crushed everything it caught hard so that speech would punch right through. Nobody thought of it as an instrument. It was a doorbell. Then one day, with Collins sitting at the kit and the Listen mic live, that talkback compressor caught the drums instead of a voice. The whole idea was to hang one mic in the middle of the studio and hear somebody talking on the other side. And it just so happened we turned it on one day when Phil was playing his drums. Padgham described the moment I accidentally pressed the reverse talkback while he was playing, and the most almighty sound came out of the speaker.
While engineers Hugh Padgham and Steve Lillywhite were working on a Peter Gabriel song with Phil Collins, Steve hit the talkback button on the console to speak to Collins in the recording studio. At that very moment, Phil was just noodling around on the drums, and the most interesting drum sound came into the mix room. This was caused mostly by the compression on the reverse talkback on that particular console. Not one to miss a serendipitous moment, Hugh decided to feed that sound back into the console and record it. What Hugh Padgham got was the legendary gated drum sound.
What the compressor was doing was grabbing the sound of the entire room, the walls, the stone floor, the air itself, and hurling it back at full force. Every hit exploded and then got sucked straight down into silence. Padgham again. I said, my God, this is the most amazing sound. The way the reverse talkback was set up, you couldn't record it. So I had a desk modified that night. I got one of the maintenance guys to take the desk apart. The most exciting drum sound anyone had ever heard, trapped inside an intercom. Padgham refused to just let it go. That same night, he had the console pulled apart. I got one of the maintenance guy to take the desk apart and get a split out of this compressor and feed it into a patch point so I could patch it into a channel on the board. Then came the second half of the trick, a noise gate. That's a device that cuts the sound off that the second it drops below a level you set. So now you got that compressed room sound pouring in and the gate chopping the tail clean off it. The room explodes and then it just vanishes. Boom, silence. Boom, silence. Nothing in the natural world behaves like that. Real sound decays, it fades, it rings out, it never simply stops dead. And that's the whole reason the sound throws people in their tracks. Some part of your brain registers that something's wrong, and even though you can't quite say what it actually is. Producer Steve Lillywhite had been chasing a version of this on Psychedelic Furs sessions. Hugh Padgham was my engineer on the Peter Gabriel album, where it first really showed its head. But I had been pushing and experimenting before with the Psychedelic Furs. But this was the night it all snapped into focus, and Gabriel's reaction to it was very Gabriel. Instead of just using the sound, he went and built an entire song around it. He handed Collins a drum pattern. Collins played it through that crushed gated room mic, and that became Intruder, the track that opens the album. No cymbals anywhere, no demo version, just a drum machine's logic, played by a human being at full violence. So the very first thing you hear on Peter Gabriel's third album is an accident that somebody decided to keep.
But the crucial thing is there's no cymbals. If the minute you put cymbals in there, it would mess it up sonically. And that was the thing with the Intruder as well, no cymbals at all.
The album came out in May 1980 and went straight to #1 in the UK. But the accident's biggest moment was still up ahead, because right around this time, Phil Collins went home to an empty house.
And I also, about 2 years ago now, I got divorced, so I actually was on my own at home,
Right.
as opposed to having the kids about.
His marriage had fallen apart. His wife had gone, and she'd taken the kids with her. Alone out at Old Croft with a drum machine and an 8-track, he started writing songs that were never meant to be some career move. They were closer to letters than to singles.
And so therefore, I had an awful lot of time on my hands, so I bought an 8-track studio and went upstairs and put it in one of the bedrooms and started work, you know.
When those demos turned into the album face value, Collins wanted one particular person behind the desk, Hugh Padgham. And on a track built out of a cheap Roland drum machine, loop, and 2 chords, the pair of them held that gated drum trick back for the exact moment it would land hardest. For the first 3 minutes and 15 seconds of In the Air Tonight, there are no real drums at all. Just that loop ticking away, and the voice getting darker and darker. And then Collins hits the kit through that same crushed listen mic chain, and it's probably the most famous single drum fill in the history of pop.
So by the time we got into recording it, I just did a fill into it, you know. Da, 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 da. I mean, like the take before would have been something different, and the take after, if I'd have done another take, would have been something different again. We decided to keep that take, and it happened to have that drum fill on it, and you know, it's just become what I'm known for. But it was real luck.
Collins talking about it years later. I don't sit down and think, what would be the best drum fill? I just did it. It could have been anything. 10 seconds of drumming, and people have been air drumming it for 45 years. And then came the part that nobody planned for. Every producer in London wanted to know how they'd gotten that drum sound. Then every producer in Los Angeles wanted to know. Then pretty much everyone did. Listen to the snare on Bowie's Let's Dance. Listen to Springsteen, Born in the USA. That colossal crack is a gated room. Duran Duran, the Power Station, Madonna, Prince, and his whole Minneapolis camp. All of them chasing that same artificial hugeness. By 1985, the gated drum wasn't a clever trick anymore. It was just the default setting for a hit. The sound of one broken intercom circuit in Shepherd's Bush had become the shorthand for an entire decade. So completely that when filmmakers today want to tell you this is the 80s, they don't reach for the clothes or the cars, they just play you this drum sound. SSL clocked what was happening too. Their later consoles made the listening mic circuit recordable on purpose, so the accident basically became a factory feature, the mistake now shipping out with his own line in the manual. And then, the way every sound eventually turns into furniture, it died. By the early 90s, gated reverb was the very definition of dated, and producers spent the whole grunge era running as far from it as possibly they could. It took a solid 20 years. The Weeknd, Lord's Theme, the 1975, before that crushed, chopped off drum came back on purpose as a deliberate vintage color. The way a Polaroid photo means memory. Phil Collins spent decades getting asked to explain the most copied 10 seconds in pop music, and his answer basically never changed. There was nothing to explain. It all came down to a band symbol, a wrong button, and a compressor that had only ever been built for talking. Gabriel got his album that sounded like nothing before. Padgham got a whole career out of it. The Police, Genesis, half the records of 80s radio, and somewhere inside every mixing console built since, there's a circuit that only exists because one maintenance engineer spent a single night in 1979 rewiring what was essentially a doorbell.